Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls, and you're listening to Rainbow Country.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, my body is distant. An electrifying and vulnerable memoir from award-winning trans writer Paige Maylott, where she invites the reader into an intimate conversation about our digital and physical selves. That and more in episode 380. So stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hello, my name is Conchita.
And I'm Barbecue.
And my name is Hardcora. And we are the B Girls.
You're listening to
Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's gay and lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #1 LGBT podcast on feedspot.com. So, today, my body is distant. Award-winning trans writer Paige Maylott shares her real life and virtual life in this powerful new memoir. She explores her authentic self and sexuality through virtual worlds where she dances in online BDSM clubs, hurls spells on virtual battlefields, not to mention being swept into a fairy tale online romance. We'll talk all about this memoir, My Body is Distant, and more. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s. And on this episode, I'm featuring some classic house, some queer pop, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 380 through Rainbow Country. Up next, the Rainbow Country School for Canadian Gay History. Today, from activist, author, and historian Tim McCaskill, Canada's Gay Pride History.
1969 was a big year. It was the year that saw both the Stonewall riots in New York and, more or less, decriminalization of gay sex in Canada. The following year, the Americans celebrated the anniversary of Stonewall with Christopher Street Liberation Day. That was the summer of 1970. They didn't actually call it Pride at the time. August 1st, 71 was Toronto's first official gay picnic at Hanlon's Point. It was organized by the Community Homophile Association of Toronto and Toronto Gay Action. 300 people showed up. Now, that wasn't officially a pride, but Gerald Moldenhauer, one of the veterans of those days, maintains that a march down Yonge Street a few weeks later should be called the first Toronto Pride. That was a warm-up for the more famous We Demand demonstration in Ottawa held August 28th that year, a protest against the inadequacies of Trudeau's decriminalization. By the way, if you want to see some pictures of those early days, check out Gerald's website. It's geraldmoldenhauer.com, and it's spelled JEARLDMOLDENHAUER. The first official Toronto Pride was actually the next year, 1972, again in August. Then there was a second Gay Pride Week, August 17th to 26th, 1973. That one was national, not just Toronto. There were events and marches in Vancouver, Saskatoon, Ottawa, Montreal, and Halifax. The focus was political, on ending discrimination against queers, something that was still quite legal across the country at the time. Then, the following year, 1974, there was Pride number 3 in Toronto, August 17th. I came out of that one, so I remember it very, very well. We marched over to Queen's Park to again demand human rights protection. And then they stopped. There was nothing in 75. People were focused on a national lesbian and gay conference in Ottawa. And again in 76, all of us in Toronto were busily preparing to host the 4th National Lesbian and Gay Conference, which happened in September. Gay Days was a big festival in 78, but nothing called itself Pride again until 1981 after the Bath Raids. That's where the misconception that Pride began after the Bath Raids comes from. 81, I suppose, is significant because that's when the shift happened from August to the last weekend in June to harmonize with prides across the US. But that's not the first Pride. So when you hear someone say that the first Toronto Pride was in 1981, you should politely point out that that's not quite true. Toronto and other cities in Canada had our own August Prides for almost a decade before that. And there are still those of us around who remember. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
When did gay pride become just pride?
I can answer that for you, and I can answer where the big turnaround was, and it's a very simple thing. Corporatism is when gay pride became pride. As soon as we got corporate sponsors, as soon as we had the approval of the corporations around us, oh my God, the beer company's going to sponsor it, and they're going to give us a float, and look at the telephone company's going to do something, and someone else is going to do something.
But drop the gay.
Yeah, drop the gay and include everyone. And I always thought, why should we include everyone? This is a gay pride celebration. It is for people who are in a sexual minority. We had something that was for us to make people recognize who we are and to acknowledge that we actually existed.
Award-winning playwright and author Brad Fraser reflects on some important gay history. The time frame, the 1990s. When gay pride becomes pride, with the introduction of corporate sponsorships.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Next, my body is distant.
Memory is a slippery and selective thing. To provide an example, think back to your earliest memory. One of mine was a hot summer day in 1979. I would have been 4 years old and my sister Lana only 2. The memory begins with us running barefoot across cool, shaded grass behind the turn-of-the-century schoolhouse our father skillfully converted into our childhood home. As I ran and Lana chased after me, grasshoppers sprang from the grass, cicadas screeched in the trees, and the neighbors' cows grazed in fields on the other side of the electrified fences which surrounded our property. Already, I have fabricated details to draw you into my story. While I know there were often cows in the fields which surrounded our house, and that cicadas often screeched in the trees, I don't remember how warm it really was. And I can't recall whether cicadas were out or if there were cows nearby that day. I have only included these pseudo-facts to pave the way to a moment that stuck with and still shapes who I am some 40-something years later. I remember we found ourselves in the sun-warmed, wood-scented back shed, where we discovered my father's tackle box. We pried open squeaky metal clasps, and inside we found the most incredible fishing lures. To our inexperienced eyes, they looked uncannily like actual fish, with shining scales drawn with metallic paints and gleaming bright eyes. Some were hinged in the middle to mimic realistic swimming, I assume. Lana grabbed as many fish as she could, somehow avoiding hooking herself. She looked up at me, her body vibrating with excitement as she said, "Let's see them swim." I agreed and gathered the rest. We ran out of the shed and across the lawn holding handfuls of jingling fish. I followed Lana to a deep circular pond ringed with flagstones, which my father had dug in the middle of our yard. Lana wasted no time as she climbed the stones and threw her handfuls into the water. When they struck the surface, years of dust splashed away, and the lures came to life. The tiny fishes twisted and flipped just below the surface. Their chromatic scales flashed in a dizzying rainbow of colors before they sank. Each twinkled in the sunlight one last time, as if giving thanks, before they disappeared into the murky depths of the pond. "Did you see that?" Lana asked. "Throw yours." I recognized the potential consequences of tossing away my father's prized fishing lures, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted to see those colors. I needed to see if they truly could come to life again. I tossed mine, alone and in twos, at Lana's impatient urgings. We watched with amazement as they rolled and flashed in the murky water as they sank, leaving us with vivid memories and regret. For me, memory is a lot like my fish story. I only seem to remember moments which particularly delight or trouble me, and sometimes the ones that flash brightest are the ones that do both. I like to think my brightest memories are also the ones which have taught me valuable lessons, like how throwing away antique heirloom fishing lures can make your father cry. This memoir is, therefore, imperfect. It will contain details as true as I can remember them, and I'm certain some recollections will be incorrect or incomplete. All I can promise is that the memories in these pages are, to the best of my knowledge, influential moments of my life which have shaped me into the woman I am today. I hope you graciously accept that possibility as I recall these stories with you. By reading them, you can cause these memories to flash and sparkle once more. While not every recollection in this memoir shines, I believe it is important to include the difficult parts and the ones that beacon on regrettable decisions. Because if we don't record these multicolored memories as accurately as possible, they might sink into the darkness and be lost forever.
Paige Maylott, hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I am well. I have to say thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about your memoir, My Body is Distant. My Body is Distant. I like to start my interviews on the ground level, basics.
Sure.
Talk to me about what you are essentially getting at in telling your story, or at least part of your story. What's in the pages of My Body is Distant? Let's start there.
Sure. So it's a memoir, as you say. So it covers my surviving stage 3 cancer. Also, it's a book about self-discovery, but also it's an atypical trans coming out story. So it's not your everyday coming out story. I like to say Well, a lot of trans people, or at least the common narrative that we hear all the time, is that, we find ourselves in our parents' closet or our partner's closet, and you discover who you are through, expression in the real world. But I didn't. I actually discovered myself in online spaces, in virtual locations. And I often joke around and say, while some people discover themselves in their parents' closet, I found myself in character creation. So I wrote the whole thing in first person narrative because my initial the impetus for creating the book was as a way that I could actually explain my story a bit better to my friends and family. Because, when you tell them that you're trans, their minds just go to, the common Hollywood narratives that they hear, right? And they're explaining to, here, I always knew this, or, I put on a dress and discovered who I was. But when you tell them that, we're playing around with identity in Second Life, they just don't get it. So I had to find a way of doing that. And for that, I had to tell the whole story, warts and all. So I had to make sure that I jumped into the book with 100% honesty, which is difficult in places. And if you've read the book, I'm sure you can see that, I'm not always painted in the best light. But that was really important to me, to take the reader, deep into my mind, show them not only what I was thinking, but also what I was seeing in those virtual places, to be able to take them into virtual worlds and show them the value of it. And I don't think that I could actually communicate that any other way than to tell them the whole story and express those virtual worlds in ways that, had value to them, to someone who was actually reading it. And yeah, that was the reason that I wrote the book, was just a plea to be understood by those closest to me. But I'm starting to realize, with all the feedback that I'm getting from people, that through my expression, through communicating all of the, typical human failings that we all share, and, our need to be loved, that I'm identifying with people, whether they're cis or trans or, hetero or queer. It just seems to be able to, connect with people, which is fantastic, but not my original goal.
So was there, I think it's fair to say that writing a book onto itself is a minor miracle. Any creative endeavor, a book, a movie, a song, any sort of thing, any sort of creative project. But in writing a memoir, you're essentially telling your journey, your story, either from the beginning or just a part of it. So was there a moment, was there a flashpoint for you that gave you the idea to write a memoir? Was there a moment for you or a flashpoint for you that said, I'm going to write a memoir. I'm going to tell my story now?
Yeah, I suppose that there was. My Body is Distant actually started as a graduate level thesis. And this was back in 2017. And I decided what I was going to do was, anecdotally, throw in some of my coming out story and analyze it with, academic theory. And, I was going to write my thesis based on this. But then I realized what a monumental undertaking that was. And it was just way too much for me to do. I'd bitten off way more than I could chew. I couldn't deal with it. I ended up breaking down in tears in my supervisor's office. And eventually I had to step away from the whole project. And I actually had to step away from finishing my master's degree entirely. I just ran out of money, as, some people do. And, as a newly coming out trans woman and, and not really being able to find gainful employment, I had to find a job. And so the thesis got shelved. The idea for the memoir got shelved. And I think this is a pretty common narrative that we often find a little bit of extra time during the COVID pandemic. And so while people were, creating sourdough bread and tending the garden, I started writing it again. I remembered something that my supervisor said was that you don't really have to tell the story in a linear fashion. You can tell it any way you want. And so I started, thinking about, how I wanted to tell this. And then it came to me, this braided narrative structure that I wrote the book in. And I had realized in that moment, this is how I have to tell the story, because up to then, it just seemed impossible and pointless too. Like I thought, who would even want to read this? There's so many other memoirs out there, as you can see. We've got like Spare, written by royalty, and we've got all kinds of fantastic stories out there. Who's
Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah, right. So who's going to want to hear about some random trans woman's story? But I had to write it. I just felt compelled to do it. I knew how I needed to write it, and so I just did. And I figured that I would deal with the marketability of it at the end, if at all, right? So, but I had to write it first. And so for the next 3 months, starting in like April 2020, I guess it was, I just spent every free moment just, writing down all of these different stories that, would inform this book. And then I went through the painstaking detail of following up with friends and family and some people who I really didn't want to talk to anymore, just to confirm that everything that I had talked about in the book was accurate, which was very important to me. Yeah. And that was kind of the tipping point. I know it's kind of cliche, but it just came to me, the structure, and I realized that I needed to get back to it. And with the COVID pandemic, I actually had a chance to write it in a way that I, always wanted to, without the constraints of academia hanging over me.
So you have some very, I think, provocative chapter titles. In My Body is Distant, Kind of a Girl, Feel Good Drag.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in is knowing about a chapter called Intercourse with the Vampire. And essentially, if you can share with the audience, essentially what you're sharing and getting at in that particular title, in that particular chapter, because I love the title.
Thank you. So
I don't personally know if I want to have intercourse with a vampire, but you go for it.
What type of vampire, right? So, yeah. So you're the first person to actually ask about the titles in the book, which I thought was kind of surprising. I thought somebody else would have asked about this already, but. Between you and me, all of the titles in the book are song titles. And every single title that's in there is associated with the era that it's written in. And if you actually listen to the lyrics of the song, they relate to the contents of the chapter. So it was kind of a little Easter egg that I threw in there for my readers. Similar into the way that, video game developers put Easter eggs in their games. So that was, a little thing that I wanted to include. But in terms of Intercourse with the Vampire, specifically, that one, yeah, that was delving back into, the 90s and my heavy goth phase, as many of us, have had or are still going through.
I was just going to say, I still see goth today.
Sure. Yeah, it's fantastic. And very similar to back in the 90s too, which is nice to see. And I think a little bit of goth always sticks with you once you've went through something like that. It never quite goes away. So in terms of the intercourse with the vampire, I think I don't want to talk about it too much because I think I'd rather leave that as an Easter egg, most of it, if somebody wants to dive into the actual lyrics. But it has to do with the intimacy with the darkness, allowing those, the dark thoughts of not only, I wouldn't say morbidity, but like melancholy more, perhaps, that we feel. We sometimes feel alone, but we're not always alone in that darkness. And it was about finding community before I actually realized that I was, trans or queer. And finding like-minded people when the rest of society doesn't accept you. So that was the important points that I was trying to touch on in that chapter.
The title, My Body is Distant.
Mm-hmm.
What's the story behind choosing this particular title?
That's a funny story, actually. So it wasn't originally My Body is Distant. So I'll get back to why I chose that in a minute. But
was it intercourse with the vampire?
Unfortunately, no. It was Together in Electric Dreams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Giorgio Moroder.
Yes. Yeah,
you're familiar? Cool.
Yeah,
so,
the never-ending story.
Yeah. So I had originally called it that, and to go along with all of the song titles of the chapters, as I was just talking about, I thought that would be a good tie-in, and my editor had thought to say about that title, though, and didn't really want to get sued, even though technically song titles aren't copyrightable. They didn't want to risk that potential lawsuit, and so they strongly suggested I think of a different title. And so I started going back and thinking of different ideas for the title, and I came across one. It was a short story I had written just a few years before My Body is Distant that was called Our Bodies Are Distant. And it was a short story about the boy that I write about in the book and myself getting together after a long period of apart, and discovering that we had moved on with our lives. And it was about sitting across from a table. It was a very short story, and though our bodies were close, we were still miles apart because we had found ourselves in an online space, right? And so I pitched, the Our Bodies Are Distant, or My Body is Distant, to my editor, and she just freaked out. But the reason that I picked it was because it actually ties into a few different things. It ties into the distance between, myself and my romances online, even though, we are close, our bodies are distant. That, the distance that we put between ourselves and society as trans people, or the distance that society separates from us, of the disgust of the trans body, and also from my current self prior to transitioning, and my ideal, right? That body is distant. So in a few different ways, I feel that it really resonated. And so that's why we picked it.
And on that note, we'll return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
As you may know, Rainbow Country started broadcasting on air June 7th, 2016. And as of today, this little gay radio show is now heard on 12 outlets across Canada from coast to coast to coast. Plus, on the podcast website, podomatic.com, Rainbow Country is a #1 LGBT podcast. And on the online aggregating website, feedspot.com, Rainbow Country is Canada's #1 LGBT podcast. This show airs on independent radio, campus and community radio, as well as on streaming. What do all of these outlets have in common? Well, they're all listener supported to help keep the lights on, the streams up, and the airwaves broadcasting. So if you think episodes like The State of Trans Healthcare in Canada, Operation Soap, an inside look at the February 5th, 1981 bathhouse raids in Toronto, if you think episodes like those, not to mention giving airplay to queer recording artists from around the world, if you, like me, think it's important to have a show, to have a platform like Rainbow Country, giving voice to the LGBT community, and beyond, I hope you'll consider making a donation to this very outlet you are tuned to. And if you're listening to the edited podcast version, please consider making a donation to an outlet that does carry Rainbow Country. Simply go to marktara.com and hit the syndication banner to find a list of syndicated outlets. Rainbow Country, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. A heartfelt thank you for having your voice and your support be heard.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us, and of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi, this is Mo Berg from The Pursuit of Happiness, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So, Paige Maylott, you are an award-winning writer. 2021 Hamilton Arts and Letters Award for Creative Nonfiction, and the winner is you.
The winner is me. Yeah.
Receiving that award, what does that mean to you? What did that mean to you, getting that award in 2021?
It was a validation, and it was a short story I'd written. It was called Mayflies. It was nonfiction. So this was the first time that I had ever published nonfiction before. My Body is Dissonant had already been purchased by ECW Press by this point, but not too many people even had it on their radar yet. And I was still, sitting and anxious, thinking about how it would be received, right? Because I'm effectively publishing my memoir, my diary, my most intimate inner thoughts, right? And even though I did it in a fun fashion, As I said, wrote it all in first person. I tried to write it as if it was a young adult novel so that it would be easily readable by just about anyone. I didn't want it to be too highbrow. I wanted it to be easily consumable. But even though I had written it in that way, I was still terrified with how it would be received, especially considering our world today and the way that, the right-wing agenda has been, ramping up steadily over the past few years. I was scared that it would get, grabbed by them or rejected by our own community, which was, always a concern. And so while I was dealing with all of that anxiety, I had suddenly won this award that you're talking about. And even though that it doesn't touch heavily on, queer narratives, it does a little. And it gave me a little bit more confidence seeing that, I could win awards for this type of writing, that people did actually appreciate reading it, even if they weren't, queer or trans, right? Because I don't believe that anyone on the awards committee was, as far as I know.
Well done. Well done. So Paige, we are both part of the LGBT community. I am gay, shocker. You are transgender. For yourself, you were talking earlier about essentially discovering your being trans online in virtual spaces. How does that work in regards to realizing that? Because there must have been moments growing up, I would think, where you felt at odds or you felt a certain kind of way. Can you talk to me about some of those instances in regards to recognizing who you are and when that started happening for you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's not a problem. So I would have to say that, from a very early age, I would say that I really clued into it when I hit puberty. Before that, I didn't think about gender at all. Like, it just didn't even hit my radar. But when, I have a sister who is very close to my age, and, we were similar height, similar age, very, very close together. And when I started hitting puberty, my voice started changing. My bone structure started changing. Everything started changing, and away from what she looked like, the similar ideal that I saw myself as, right? And it felt as if my body was betraying itself or betraying me. It was really highly distressing. Of course, I didn't understand what that meant, what the implications of that were, because this was all back in the 80s and 90s. And for anyone who grew up in the 90s, they could tell you it was a horrible place to grow up if you're queer. And, I have distinct memories of being around 18 or 19 in the mid-90s and just thinking, like, am I a girl? Like, am I a girl? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? But also instinctively knowing that I had to hide that. It just wasn't a world with any sort of information on, even if I wanted to transition at that time, where would I even go about to start doing something like that? There was no sort of way of finding out that type of thing if you weren't in a supportive environment. And so I just, I suppressed, I internalized the transphobia, and I, was miserable. And I communicate a little bit of that in the book. But I wouldn't say that I, was clueless to all of this. I just didn't feel that I had a avenue to explore it. And so, ever since I would say 12, I was exploring identity online. I was going into chat rooms, presenting as a woman in chat rooms.
And you found yourself feeling more free that way, I would assume.
Absolutely. I definitely felt more free. It was almost as if it was I liken it to getting my fix. So, I would be able to endure the real life as long as I was able to get online and be myself, be a woman now and again, and it would satiate me for a little while, and then I would just have to keep coming back and doing it again. Eventually, when I was undergoing chemotherapy and radiation for cancer, I was, so sick that I was unable to live in the real world anymore. And so I was almost entirely online. And that's when I realized that I couldn't hide from this any longer. And I had to, move what I had online and see if I could realize that in the real world.
Yeah.
And the result of that is all outlined in the book, of course.
So you were just touching about this just now in regards to what's happening in America and to a certain degree here in Canada too, especially with the far right and being part of the LGBT community. We've come so far. We have legal rights when it comes to marriage and all this sort of stuff. We've come a long way, especially in Canada. But yet here we are in 2023, and we're seeing some of those rights rolled back, at least in America. We're seeing, like schools not wanting to raise, pride flags up here in Canada. And why is this happening? And that's the question that I would love to get your thoughts on in regards to, we've come so far as a community and gaining rights. But yet here we are in 2023, and we're facing like a new level of backlash for some reason. Like, since when did drag shows and drag brunches become such a threatening event?
Right.
So what are your thoughts on why you think this backlash is happening now?
Yeah. I mean, I wish that I could be a fly on the wall in some of these, far right Christian meetings to, understand if they've got a full agenda. But all I can see is that here in Canada, they're following the same playbook as we've seen mobilized in the States, and we've seen mobilized in the UK. It's a faux concern for children's safety. And it's all a game, really. They're children, they're concerned for children's safety, as I say, is a faux concern. And their real goal, of course, is to, shove us back in the closet.
And why do you think they want us back in the closet? Because because we might be equal? Because we might have a voice now? And have had for a while?
Well, of course. And I mean, this isn't the first time we've seen this, of course. Like back in the 70s and 80s, we saw these exact same narratives following, gay rights. And, I honestly believe that it's because, we're actually advancing, we're pushing forward still. I don't think that they're winning the way that they believe they are. But it is going to be a fight. And
how do you feel in regards to you and your everyday life and safety? Do you have any? Are you always aware when you're out and about?
Oh, absolutely. I just had my book launch, and everything was going great. And then someone from the back of the room called out, why do you think, we're seeing so many more trans kids these days? Do you think that they're confused? That was the question. that I got yelled out. And I could see that, some of the security at the back was looking a little nervous about it. But I chose to take the question. And it was just one person. And the funny thing is I don't believe that they were being malicious. I honestly believe that they were curious. And I think maybe they just wandered into it was in a public library. I think that maybe they just walked into my book release event, and we're really seeing it as an avenue to learn. And so I told them, there isn't more trans people today. It's the same amount of trans people there always was. It's just that today they feel a little bit more safer to come out than they did, 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
It's definitely more in the headlines, though.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's in all the headlines. And honestly, I hate to quote Gandhi with something like this, but I think, what did Gandhi say? First they laugh at us, then they ignore us, then they fight us, then we win, or something like that. I think that's what he said. So loosely quoted there, but I honestly believe that, we need to stay strong. We need to, keep fighting, all as much as we can in the ways that we can, right? And our activism will all look different, whether it's publishing a book, whether it's, going on social media and educating people, whether it's, running courses in a university setting, whatever it is, whatever, or hell, just, keeping up with the drag brunches, keeping up with the drag story time events, despite all of this, and we really need to call on our allies to step up and do the work that allies need to do to protect us during this time.
And queering those spaces.
Yeah, and queering those spaces.
There's an audio book component to My Body is Distant, correct?
There is, yeah.
Are you doing the voiceover?
I am.
How was that experience for you?
It was incredible. Mm-hmm. I couldn't believe how much work goes into writing or actually creating an audiobook. It's bizarre reading your own book and then being corrected, which was so bizarre because I would be reading and then they would cut the record and they go, oh no. It says this here, and I would have to go back and they would play it back to me and I would misread my own book sometimes. And apparently that's a very common thing to happen, but it's a really interesting process. And I mean, I feel so blessed and honored that I would have even been asked to narrate it. But it was fun, and people seem to be enjoying it. So great, even though I can't stand the sound of my own voice. I'm sure that's pretty common with most people, but others seem to enjoy it. So great.
So here, Paige, here's my last question for you. What do you hope audiences come away with after they've read, after they've listened to your memoir, My Body is Distant?
Well, I would really love for people to understand that trans people are individuals, just like everybody else. We all have our own stories. Every transition story is unique. And we all just don't follow the singular narrative that you see in sensationalist media. I would really love for people to be able to read my book and to identify with portions of the story, despite how different they might think we are. I mean, we're all human. We're all going through horrible things all the time in the world that we live in. And we're all just looking to be, understood and loved. And if people can come away from the book with that small little takeaway, I would be so happy.
Paige Maylott, well said, well done, well written.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. 2010, another 11 years later. in an abandoned amusement park. Emerging from a cloud of rose-scented mist, Callie's face is lit electric pink as we pass a buzzing neon heart on the tunnel's rocky wall. We float together in a giant rubber duck that pulls us along a submerged track toward an expanding arch of light. As we pass through the cave's mouth, sunlight gleams off the duck's droplet-sprinkled plastic wings, and the sequined lining of my bridal gown reflects shimmering rainbows across the water's surface. Callie caresses my ears. What did you think? Best honeymoon ever, I say. We're only getting started. A sly smirk hints at the corner of Callie's mouth as he pulls me close. I rest my cheek against his suit-covered chest, allowing myself to melt into the relaxing vibration of his affectionate purring. Being here, having him holding me, sharing this moment together in an actual tunnel of love with my husband has made all the fuss of the past 2 weeks of wedding mayhem worthwhile. This does truly feel perfect, even though I know that none of this is real. Not in the way most people value realness. I know this amusement park we're in, this plastic duck boat, and even our avatars are just lines of code stored on a softly humming server somewhere. Despite that, I feel an authentic bond with Callie, which is no less valid than the intimacy and trust that accompanies sharing your bed and life with someone in the real world. In loving relationships, we seek reassurances that our partner cares for us. Grand romantic gestures may be beautiful and sweep you off your feet, but they're easily staged. We communicate true love through a multitude of selfless moments. Love appears as an unprompted cup of tea, just the way you like it on a tough day. Or when you fawn over a beautiful sweater and a week later, it appears on the dining room table, even when it's not your birthday. Genuine gestures of love can even appear in an act as simple as being cuddled as the little spoon while you drift off to sleep. Despite what you might think, these gestures can mean more online. Callie's wedding suit is an excellent example. If he and I married in real life, he might buy or rent a suit. A tailor then measures and makes alterations, but all Callie has done is point and pay and pick it up when he's ready. Here, Callie inevitably tried on multiple suits from multiple online vendors, still spent real money to buy it, but then he also sank hours in an editor, carefully tweaking the suit's proportions to accommodate his unique furry body. It took me 3 days to find and fit a bridal dress that showed my tail, and then edit a veil so that it didn't cut off my ears. Callie proposed with an emerald ring. While he likely didn't spend too much to buy it, he took the time to learn I preferred emeralds to diamonds. Communication and attention to detail mattered just as much here. He also scouted this abandoned amusement park for us to be alone. Thoughtful kindnesses like these are more than I've ever experienced in a real-life relationship. In some ways, online relationships better illustrate commitment and desire. In real life, you and I might walk together. Your hand might bump mine, and we might like the feeling of accidental touch enough to hold hands. It could be sweet, but there's a casualness to this act that cannot occur online. In virtual worlds, we might similarly walk together, but you would intentionally position your character closer to mine, target me, and initiate a command like, /hold hands with Lydia. While stepping out of a romantic moment to type may sound detached, if my online partner values the time required to specifically write an affectionate gesture just because they want to build a connection, doesn't that add something? Describing a character's intention is not only precise and deliberate, but every descriptive pose my partner writes is only for me, for us, to create our memorable moment. Whether we're holding hands or fighting or fucking, We craft line after line of descriptive prose, a conscious, poetic rededication to the value of our relationship. So, yes, I know that our relationship, our marriage, and this moment are not real in the way society might define it. But for a lonely and sick trans woman, they are everything. Besides, don't scientists say reality as we understand it might be lines of code anyway?
My Body is Distant is available wherever you get your favorite books and audiobooks because, as we just heard, it is also an audiobook. For more on this award-winning author, simply visit Maylott.com. And by the way, that's where you'll also find the official Spotify playlist to My Body is Distant.
Magnus Hirschfeld made the modern homosexual. He co-founded the world's first gay rights group, the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, in Berlin in 1897. But what is far more important is that he and his colleagues came up with an enormously influential concept of what same-sex desire was, what it meant, and how it fit into the wider world. If you think homosexuality is an inborn quality that cannot be changed and has a biological root, but is not an illness, and if you think gay people are a sexual minority who are born that way and who deserve legal protections just as racial minorities do, you owe those ideas to Hirschfeld and a handful of others. He was among the first to articulate that conceptual model of what it means to be gay in print in 1896.
We just heard professor, author, and historian of queer and trans politics, Lori Marhofer, reading from Racism and the Making of Gay Rights, a sexologist, his student, and the Empire of Queer Love, their powerful new gay history book, about the man who made the modern homosexual, a German physician and sexologist who died at the age of 67 in 1935. Magnus Hirschfeld.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com where everything is connected and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Michael Anthony Alago, music executive, photographer, author, and you are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.